I have a question about the implants, especially the bone implants. So you say that in your so these implants that you do, when they are in the body, the idea is that they erode away slowly and they are replaced with healthy tissue. So what happens to this material that erodes away? Does it exit the body, or is it stored somewhere? Does it just break down completely?
So it actually exits the body. You will just it will just leave your body through your intestines and your kidneys.
I would continue with this. To me, it was a bit unclear. You might have said it, but how are these techniques and these materials being used? How widely, and are they sort of competing with other techniques and materials?
Well, the techniques, the 3D printing is of course, it's a very wide field now, and everybody has sort of started doing it. This type of 3D printing is quite complex in the sense that with the light you need and to get your material to work on a specific machine is not always easy and straightforward. So in that sense, it's tough. The material itself is competing with, for example, polylactic acid, which is a material you can, sometimes you have these plastic cups for your coffee, that's for example also polylactic acid. And that could also be used for implants like this. PTMC itself is not in this form, at least not implanted yet. And in terms of the printing technique, yeah, it's competing with other techniques, and others are sometimes a bit easier. But there are 3D printed implants used. So actually my promoter, he has, in this case it was 3D printed titanium implanted somewhere. So that's already happening, yes.
Right, yeah. So, but is it like essentially, is it a question of money, or what are the benefits?
Well, at the moment, it's a question of doing the right investigations, because we're now at the moment where we have a few animal studies done or being done at the moment. And the steps after that is a limited group of patients, then a bigger group of patients, and for that you need a lot of money. There's a lot of rules. You need a lab in which you can make this in such way that it's acceptable to be implanted, and to say it, for now, for example, the lab, when we make this in a setting, that's not in the correct way for implanting in the human body. So there is investment needed, and lots of rules you need to be able to get the FDA approval, get the CE approval in Europe. And this material is not there yet, as it is now, at least.
Okay, good, thank you.
I have another question about the second talk. So you mentioned that Luther's ideas about gender were not considered very radical in that time. So do you have examples of radical contemporaries in one direction or other? What were their views?
Well, I think that the most radical contemporaries were actually women who well, actually starting with Christine de Pizan from a few hundred years earlier had questioned the whole system of gender hierarchy that was based on human biology and the functions of the body. So, but nothing particularly comes to my mind as a shocking example of how the contemporaries could speak about that. But of course, the women themselves who felt the pressure of the current system were often those who also stood out and try to make a change, a few of those.
I wanted to ask about your case and how that relates to sort of the direction that you are looking to go towards, i.e. is this something that you can make, is this like a market type of, you can put it out in the market, or is it something that you look to, like how is this, because it's a big, you know, competition there in these sort of innovations. So is that the idea, or would it be, how would you then, once you make it into a product that you can actually sell, how does that happen?
Well, so that happens, for example, by working together with people from Helsinki University in our current project, so the ones I couldn't show you the results of. And there are companies involved that actually work on bone implants. They have their own forms now, but they are looking to improve those. They have some disadvantages for those, and they might want to bring it to the market. There are options to bring a material to the market. So even not as an implant, but just as a material. So say, make the mixture of one of these bone-forming compounds and your material and start selling that, and let people do whatever they want with that. At the moment, for me, it is research related. So I really want to sort of know how this material works, if it works as we think it should do, and what can we improve still. So at the moment myself, I am not busy with trying to get this to the market, no. But as we need to go through all these regulatory hoops anyway still, that would be, if we start now, 5 to 10 years away anyways.
That would include having a patent or something like this, I mean, to make it protected, your innovations. And
so with everything that's published now and what's being done, I think the specific combination of technique and material cannot be patented anymore. And the material combination is already patented. And we work together in this project now here in Aalto with the people who own the patent.
Could I continue with this topic? I was thinking about the bone implants that you were talking about, to which you had like put 20 or 40, was it % of something? But the results were quite similar in the case of 20 and the 30 and the 40. Yeah. The end result. My question is, what would happen if it was like 60 or 80? What would happen, and would it be possible to make like 60 or 80% of?
60 might be possible, yeah. 80, I don't think it's possible, but it has to do with the mixture you get and how liquid it is, and if it can still cross-link in the printer. That's a bit of a technical issue. Studies have shown that 60% material of this bone-forming material in a polymer for sort of on a molecular level for the cells are similar to 100% bone-forming material. So you don't have to go higher than 60%. While the difference, and I actually have an extra slide on that added to the end. So there is a small difference between 20 and 40. You can see it here. But maybe the difference in bone ingrowth and soft tissue ingrowth. So that's where you can divide it. The soft tissue will be cartilage-like or cartilage-like tissue. Where the difference is maybe that the 40% is 60 to 38 and the 20% is 60-40. So the difference is not statistical, but this is only after 6 weeks. So you do see, and that you see on the top right, that the density of the tissue is much higher. So it might be that this this 40% not bone in the 40% material still has a higher chance of becoming bone than in the 20%, but therefore the study is a bit short maybe. So this is always a little bit, is there a real difference, or maybe 20% is indeed enough? It could very well be.
I had a question to the other speaker. I was interested in hearing the reception of your research among perhaps the Luther scholars or the wider scholarly community, because when I was listening to your presentation, I thought, okay, these are somehow in conflict with the idea of Luther as a reformer and someone who was radically rethinking some of the basic tenets of Christianity. So I was thinking, is this something controversial to really have the gender aspect included, or is this something that is somehow already known that those views were not really radical the same way as perhaps some other views he had?
Thank you. That was a very good question. In Luther studies, there has been during the recent years, a growing amount of research has emphasized the continuities that Luther was representing as regards his predecessors. So the picture of the radical Luther who just stepped into the scene and made everything like different has been long disputed and buried. But I think in the question of the human being and gender and especially femininity, there are sort of different schools in how to understand his thinking. Some of course regard him as a chauvinist who just continued the path that former centuries had presented already. Something he was even a feminist. So it depends. Of course, it always depends on what we choose to use from Luther's writings and from the past, how we choose to read his writings. So we can find, like, really, as I presented here, both really from today's point of view chauvinist insights from him, but also I would say almost feminist, not properly feminist views. But I think that the whole question of Luther being representing continuity as regards former views is quite accepted throughout the Luther studies. But of course, the looking into the human being from the viewpoint of body and gender is something that has not much been done in former Luther research, which is often systematic theologian who has studied the subject. Most often the focus is on soul and spirit and the so-called theological anthropology. So
I have kind of a continuation question to this about Luther's views. When we think about the past 50 years of the Finnish Lutheran Church, one of the big questions and the big divides has been on the question on female pastors. And I suppose this is also a question in other Lutheran churches around the world. what is the weight of your argument to this discussion? Is it relevant in this discussion? You know, this "what would Luther say" type of an argument in this regard. What do you think?
Well, I think many people in the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church are really interested about what would Luther say about this, and he is used to oppose female ministry and to defend it. I have actually written a small piece to this discussion quite recently. I think I may be repeating what I was saying to you, but the key question is how we are using the past and how we are using Luther. Many defenders of female ministry tend to focus on how Luther was acting in a new situation, how he was like thinking his thesis anew, so to say, in a new situation, and this kind of contextuality and readiness to think things anew in the new situation is one of the main points of the defending side, so to say. But of course there are as there is in the Bible, like clear passages in which you can relate to when you are sort of negative towards the whole issue.
Okay, so I have a very basic question to Sini, since my own research field is so different. So can you describe how you actually do this kind of research? Like, what do you use most of your time to, and what are the main challenges, for example, this kind of the language problems in finding the material and so on?
There are no problems in finding the material in the case of Luther. So his sources that are both in German and in Latin are written in the Weimarer Ausgabe, which is very easily found also in the digitalized version. So the factual problem is the amount of the source material. There are like over 80,000 pages of his writings, from which you have to sort of dig your own stuff. So I've used much of my time just reading the sources through. Some of those are translated in English, but not all. So so the language issue is one of the like main points of. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes.
Actually, I might have a follow-up comment or question on this. I was wondering about specifically the kind of dining speeches or what you mentioned.
The table talk.
Yeah, how critical are you about those? Because I'm wondering who wrote them down. If I imagine like a merry round of people drinking and dining and someone giving a speech, who takes notes during that? So I mean, how reliable is that as a source? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, they actually, I think they are not really reliable. And actually, they are the first quotation that I had is from 1530s, so I didn't include it in my thesis. It was only a for you a taste of what Luther could have said when he got the furthest. But yeah, I wasn't using them in my dissertation, and of course you have to be really critical about the people who made the notes of what he was saying, were his guests, his students, and other guests, and of course it is really a question mark of what is from Luther originally and what is not, and in what sort of state of mind has he said the things. Of course, the same problem is with, for instance, sermons, which are also written down often by someone else than himself. So you really have to be critical when reading the material.
Because I'm thinking, I mean, not only him was drunk, but maybe also the guests.
Yeah.
So if they wrote it down.
Yeah, true.
Yes, I have another question about the materials. So the kind of primary sources, so you mentioned correspondence and what else? Sermons and this kind of... Yeah. So is there a difference in Luther's thinking when it comes to the kind of situation, whether it's private or public communication? Because obviously he was a very public figure, am I right? So in his kind of thinking about what you've been studying, is there a difference between the private Luther and the public Luther?
Yes and no. So often what he says sort of in public goes hand in hand with what he says in private, but not always. So in private he could be, of course private and public are a bit problematic like concepts themselves to be used, but if we use them, then in public he was more sort of, he had more room to represent different sides of the thing at issue. But I was actually surprised when I was finishing my dissertation that he was rather consistent throughout the material. So there are some like special groups of people or individuals that he treats really, really differently than what his like main thinking is and I think the matter is about how close the person or the group of people is or are to him, or how strategically important they are to him. So in case of his own benefit, of course he's more flexible than in cases that his own interest is not in the fore, so to say. But the borderline is not clear-cut.
Well, I also might ask something from you, Sineas. You mentioned the phenomenological notion or phenomenological expression of way of being, I think that was you used. I don't know how deep you want to go into this kind of philosophical discussions. Obviously, our ways of being are culturally determined. Obviously, we can see that Luther's existence was very different from our existence, and it certainly also applies to gender. This probably might be at best a sidetrack, but I would like to hear your opinion. So how far do you want to go with this kind of a way of being as culturally determining human existence? So obviously sort of a heated debate regarding the biological sort of foundations, the evolutionary foundations, even though everybody admits that we exist as human beings differently from other human beings in a different culture, in a different era, but still are there sort of like some conditions determined by our sort of a biological makeup? I don't know whether you want to go into this discussion, but I would like to hear your opinion.
Well, as a theologian and historian, I would prefer not to go really deep into that. It could have been possible to use, like I was thinking about the classic sex and gender differentiation, or the conceptualization of gender roles, or someone has been using the concept gender destiny. But I thought that a sort of I thought that Heinämä's conceptualization of the way of being or style was really usable from my point of view, when not making a radical difference between, for instance, biology and culture.
Right.
So I was using it rather, should I say, lightly, as a tool for.
Sure, I do understand that's totally acceptable too, that you have this kind of conceptual tools that you apply in your own research. And then whether they are, how successful they are, the results show that.
Sure.
If they have like explanatory power. So, more questions, comments, observations?
So I'm wondering whether Luther wrote anything about the gender in nature and whether he applied his thinking also from the human perspective to animal kingdom.
That is a good question to which I cannot really answer straight away. He did discuss nature in some points of his writings, but I really cannot say anything more about it.
Okay, that was a tough one.
Just a little short notion. I really tried to think what's similar in your presentations, and I hardly could invent anything. But then I realized that you both are talking about body, and what are the limits of the body, and what is natural, and like you're talking about artificial ads, and like helping nature, and you are talking about natural hierarchies from a theological viewpoint, from Luther's thinking. So that's just something I noted, perhaps.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be provocative, but Bas, do you see any ethical issues in your own research?
The ethical issues probably would be with animal experiments that we sort of are required to do because we need to sort of inside a body look at the reaction. And you don't want to just take somebody off the street and say, okay, we're going to take some bone of you and put something in there. Sorry?
Macchiarini. The Italian surgeon who replaced wind tubes with plastic tubes.
No, I don't know the story, but so that's something, and of course that we don't. Yeah, so we have to do this because the thing with biomaterials, what we're talking about, and implantation of those, There is actually, I don't know the title, but I heard from some friends there is an interesting documentary online where they discuss they had these implants against the prolapse to prevent that from happening. And these implants weren't validated properly enough, and the implants with all the intestines and all came out. So there is definitely some ethical issues there. Yeah, we have to be really careful in how we proceed.
So, more questions, comments? Well, I'd like to hear from you both. I mean, like the very next step. You mentioned your sort of, you both were talking mainly about your PhD thesis, but I mean, very briefly, I mean, in research. So what is like the next goal?
We've seen for these bone implants that the first implantations, have been there, but we now need to look in more in situ, so more in the place where we actually plan to use these implants to see if it works there as well. Yeah. And the thing with PTMC is it degrades, but very slowly. So if I implant a bit of PTMC in your body, then maybe 5 weight% a year is gone. So I am, in that sense, busy trying to find ways to make that a little bit quicker. We're not bothered by it, but the tissue itself will take anywhere between 3 months and 2 years to fully form. And it would be nice that after those 2 years the material is completely gone. So I'm trying to sort of speed that up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. What about you, Sini?
Well, Luther has been part of my life for years now, so.
It finds your existence in a very strong way, I guess.
Yeah. And I was nearly like vomiting when I was handing my thesis, and I thought that if I ever have to do anything with Luther again, I'm going to be dead. So I'm going to a bit of another direction with the Reformation women mostly. Actually, I'm keeping Luther with me as a sort of a sidetrack, but my postdoc project that has to do with ego documents and the identity building. I use mostly material from female writers. Yeah. So I'm now switching my viewpoint from men talking about women to women themselves.
Okay, but you're still sort of tracking Luther somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not necessarily a bad thing. So, I mean, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can thank you, the speakers, again.